Begin in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Heavenly Father, we give you thanks and praise. Thank you for sending your Son, Jesus Christ, to save us from our sins and redeem us from our fallen nature. Thank you for sending the Holy Spirit, the Consoler, the Advocate, to guide us into all truth. The truth that you are love, that you are perfectly loving persons in perfect relationship. Help us, guide us to heal our relationships so that we can love authentically as you do. And we pray in your name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. So good to be here with you all today. I'm going to speak on forgiveness, the importance of forgiveness, and how that can help us to grow in our friendships with other people and with God. And I want to begin with a scripture passage, Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 to 35. Peter approached Jesus and asked him, "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive him? As many as 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I say to you, not 7 times, but 77 times. That is why the kingdom of heaven may be likened to a king who decided to settle accounts with his servants. When he began the accounting, a debtor was brought before him who owed him a large amount. Since he had no way of paying it back, his master ordered him to be sold, along with his wife, his children, and all his property, in payment of the debt. At that, the servant fell down, did him homage, and said, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back in full.' Moved with compassion, the master of that servant let him go and forgave him the loan. When that servant had left, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him a much smaller amount. He seized him and started to choke him, demanding, 'Pay back what you owe.' Falling to his knees, his fellow servant begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay you back.' But he refused. Instead, he had the fellow servant put in prison until he paid back the debt. Now, when his fellow servants saw what had happened, they were deeply disturbed and went to their master and reported the whole affair. His master summoned him and said to him, 'You wicked servant, I forgave you your entire debt because you begged me to. Should you not have had pity on your fellow servant, as I had pity on you?' Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless you forgive your brother from your heart." Jesus doesn't hold back, does he? "Lord, if my brother sins against me, how often must I forgive him? As many as 7 times? No," Jesus answers, "I say to you, 77 times. Forgiveness is the absolute heart of our faith. Every time we pray the Our Father, right? We bravely ask God, "Oh, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us." Do we realize what we're really asking when we pray that prayer? Asking God to only be as forgiving as we are? Wow. Listen again to how Jesus just ended that parable. Then in anger, his master handed him over to the torturers until he should pay back the whole debt. So will my heavenly Father do to you, unless each of you forgives his brother from his heart. We must forgive. We must. We must. And so today I want to help you do just that by clarifying the nature of forgiveness, by addressing some common misunderstandings of forgiveness, and by offering some practical, concrete steps you can take to make progress in forgiving those who, in the words of our Father, trespassed against you. But first, let me begin with a story. Everybody loves stories. Jesus loves stories, right? Now, forgiveness, it can be a long, difficult, painful process for sure. And a concrete example was shown to be by my dad and my uncle. See, my father refused to forgive his brother for decades. Now, I'm a late surprise. My dad was 55 years old when I was born. So I just came into this world seeing my dad unwilling to forgive his brother, and I didn't know, right? Throughout my entire childhood, I watched my dad harbor resentment towards his younger brother, and I don't even know what all the details were. I just know it had something to do with farming and buying land, and with promises that were made and promises that were broken, and with all the innumerable complications that are just part of family life, right? But I watched my dad struggle for decades, and I wish I would have known back then enough to share the true nature of forgiveness with my dad, to be able to explain forgiveness clearly and precisely. I think it would have helped him. So I hope it will help all of you. Here it is. Forgiveness is an act of mercy. Mercy, which according to St. Thomas Aquinas is the greatest of the virtues in itself. Mercy, just blows my mind. Mercy, St. Thomas says, is the virtue by which God's omnipotence is most chiefly manifested. So God's all-powerful nature is most chiefly manifested through mercy. And of all the virtues that relate to our neighbor, St. Thomas says, mercy is the greatest. Because a merciful act surpasses all others. Now, a virtue, right? A virtue is a habit in your soul that is formed by individual acts of virtue. You must practice it. So if you want to grow in the virtue of mercy, you need to make concentrated, repeated acts of forgiveness to help you develop a merciful soul, right? Now, the specific act of mercy, that is forgiveness, has two components. First, both of these sound so paradoxical and contradictory, but it's what forgiveness is. The first component is the foregoing of resentment or revenge, even when the wrongdoer's actions deserve it. Hopefully everybody got one of these handouts picked up. I'm working my way through the front right now. And this is so important. It's the first little point after Jesus's quote. The two specific acts, the components of forgiveness. One, the foregoing of resentment or revenge, even when the wrongdoer's actions deserve it. And second, giving the offender gifts of mercy, generosity, and love when they don't deserve them. Oh, man, forgiveness is not easy. That's why we need God to help us. Let me continue with the story. With the nature of forgiveness clarified, let me talk a little bit more about my dad and my uncle. Now, when I was growing up, every single year, without fail, during Advent, my dad would always ask me, "Son, what do you want for Christmas this year?" And when I was a little kid, right, it would be some new toy. But as I grew up, and my dad's question never changed, although the things I asked for did, right? "Son, what do you want for Christmas this year?" Well, when my dad was 88 years old, I found myself in a curious situation when Advent arrived. I was 33 at the time. So when my dad asked me his yearly question, "Son, what do you want for Christmas this year?" I had to really pause and think about it. At 88 years old, right? My dad might not have many Christmases left. And eventually it came to me. I knew what I needed to ask for. So I went down to the store and I bought a really nice Christmas card. And I wrote in it a thoughtful message to my dad. And I told him what I wanted for Christmas back in 2013. "Dad, what I want for Christmas this year, more than anything, is for you to forgive your brother Bob." And it's strange to look back at that moment and realize that neither of them made it to the next Christmas. We can live our lives trapped in shackles of resentment and bitterness, because we're also carrying around so many misunderstandings about forgiveness. So now I want to help you get rid of some of those common misunderstandings. And that's the next two lists after the quote from the Catechism there. There's more on this handout than I'm covering, so you can go back and look at it. But this is really important to clarify, make sure you're not falling into any of these misunderstandings about forgiveness. So first, forgiveness does not mean forgetting or condoning or excusing what has happened. It doesn't mean renouncing efforts to obtain restitution or legal justice. It doesn't mean suppressing or not feeling anger. None of those things is what forgiveness is about. Forgiveness is about foregoing resentment or revenge, even when they deserve it. And it means doing acts of mercy and love, even when they don't deserve it, right? But these things doesn't mean forgetting, condoning, excusing, renouncing, suppressing anger, no. It also, this is the next list of 4, does not require that the offender, whoever hurt you, first admit the offense. It doesn't require that they ask for forgiveness. It doesn't require that they make appropriate restitution. It doesn't matter that they be willing and able to change, right? Because sometimes the people that hurt us most, who are struggling to forgive, may be dead and gone for a decade. Can't sit around and wait for them to ask for forgiveness. That's not what forgiveness is about. Those are misunderstandings about forgiveness. Now, a really, really, really important distinction. And this is skipping a little bit farther down the page, but I think it's really important to point out now while we're talking about misunderstandings about forgiveness. This is reconciliation. You see where I have reconciliation down a little bit further? Reconciliation, this requires an offer and acceptance of forgiveness. It also includes the additional step beyond forgiveness of reestablishment of trust. Now, in our families, our siblings, people who will always be our family, always be connected to us, sometimes we're called to heroically take this step beyond forgiveness to reconciliation, but not always. There are times when people hurt us and habitually hurt us. We still have to forgive them. But in prudence, we don't have to be reconciled. God doesn't ask us to be reconciled with every single person who's hurt us. But we are called to forgive, always. So after I handed my dad the card and said, "Here's what I want for Christmas, Dad," he slowly read it over once, twice, at least thrice before saying anything. And of course, he first responded with a brief, "Well, I already have." But I just took that opportunity to open my heart, right? And share what I'd seen during my 3 decades as his son. The bitterness, the anger, the resentment, the flare-ups whenever my uncle came around, my dad's friends needling him about his brother just to push my dad's buttons. I laid it all out there for him, and then he finally said, okay, I understand. Let's go do this together. You see, there's 2 common pitfalls that people fall into when you're talking about forgiveness. Man, I didn't put my handout together very well. This is on the back. So after all the steps of forgiveness, you're going to see the 2 common pitfalls. One common pitfall is just prematurely forgiving by just skipping the uncovering phase that we'll talk about in a little bit. Just being like, yeah, I forgive him, right? Or just blowing off forgiveness as something unimportant. And what my dad was trying to pull, right, was that first thing. But that's not authentic forgiveness. Just like when your parents say, forgive your brother, and like, man, make up, right? No, forgiveness must be free. It must be chosen. And another common pitfall is thinking about the pain and the hurt over and over again and never moving beyond it, right? That's another common pitfall. It's amazing how the two common pitfalls are both in that first phase at the opposite ends of what's possible. One is like completely ignoring all the pain and suffering, be like, yeah, whatever, I forgive him. And the other is just ruminating on the pain forever and ever and ever and never moving beyond it. It takes courage and fortitude to avoid both of those pitfalls, but a good friend or loving family member can help, right? So my dad and I, we hopped in the car and drove straight up to the hospital where my Uncle Bob had recently been admitted. And I watched as my dad stood before his brother, who was lying in a hospital bed, but he was conscious and fully aware. And I watched the struggle. I watched the stuttering lips. And I also watched the most heroic, singular act of forgiveness that I've ever seen firsthand. I watched the heart open, I watched the ice melt, and I watched the drops splash on the hospital tile. I had 33 Christmases with my dad, and truly the greatest gift was his last. Now, I want to offer you some concrete, practical steps to help you get better at making acts of forgiveness in your own life so that you can grow in the virtue of mercy. Now, there's 4 steps you really need to take. The time to go through when you're striving and struggling and trying to forgive someone. And it's important to spend time in each step. This starts on the bottom of the front and goes through the back. I go in a lot of detail on this handout, more than I'm going to go through here. But it's important to spend time in each step. And it's not like, okay, I'm done with step 1, now all I do is step 2. Now all I do is step 3. Now all I do is step 4. No. You got to work, and it moves back and forth, and new things will be uncovered, and you got to work in the healing. But each of them take time. First, uncovering, deciding, working, and then deepening the forgiveness. So first, you need to uncover very clearly the effects of the offense. You got to clarify the offense objectively. This is tough. You basically, what you have to do is take yourself out of the whole equation, remove yourself from it, think about it as objectively as possible. What actually happened? What actually was said? Look at what you could see if you were an outside observer. Clarify exactly what happened, okay? But you also have to uncover all the subjective consequences. You have to look at how everybody was hurt, everybody involved in the situation, how you were hurt. You have to look at the pain because you have to be aware of the pain in order to forgive authentically, right? Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Jesus was aware of that pain as they nailed his hands to that cross, yet he still forgave. You have to be aware of the pain in order to forgive. Second step, you need to make the decision to forgive. You need to make a concrete act of the will, deciding to forgive. You got to realize that resentment doesn't work. You got to understand the nature of forgiveness, which I really tried to clarify as we began here, right? And then you have to actually decide. Your decision must be freely chosen. Why? It's an act of mercy. It's an act of love. And love is an act of the will. That's why you must choose freely and engage your will to forgive. And third, you need to work at it. Really work. Just like any other virtue, a great analogy to virtues in the soul is sports, right? Anybody who's ever played any sport or ever tried to get any good at a hobby, you just got to keep doing it. You got to shoot free throws for hours a day to get as good as Steph Curry. It works the same way with any virtue in your soul. You have to make a habit. You got to work at it. And this third work phase, you got to think different. You got to turn around your perspective. You got to understand the offender. What was life for life growing up for them, right? At the time of the offense, You got to have a global perspective. You have to take a spiritual perspective. You have to put yourself in the heart of God and ask Him to share His perspective on this person with you. And then you got to make concrete actions. You must act. You must act. That's what virtue is. Concrete actions, concrete acts of mercy. And now this, on the back page, the next little thing here is the only part that's italicized and underlined because it's the most important part of everything I'm going to say about forgiveness right now. You must accept the pain and not pass it on. That's the heart. That is the key. That is forgiveness in one sentence. You must accept the pain and not pass it on. It's an emotional process. It's not a rational process. Yes, you must make the decision. You must understand what forgiveness is. But this work phase, it's an emotional phase. And guys who tend to be not very emotional, they tend to fall in the pitfall of, I already forgave him, whatever, let's get on with my life. What do I need to do next? No, that's not authentic forgiveness. Women tend to get stuck in that ruminating on the pain again and again and again because they're so emotional and they can't move beyond it. No, you must make the decision to forgive and realize that what you've been doing isn't working because you need that freedom of the next step. Fourth, you need to take time deepening the forgiveness. Like putting the decision and the work all together in a crock pot and just letting it simmer. And this is what produces the release from the emotional pain, increased positive experiences, and even while you're suffering the pain of being nailed to the cross, you can still speak with love, forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do, and be a conduit of God's grace to redeem fallen humanity. Forgiveness is the absolute heart of our faith. Let me get back to my story. So right after that Christmas was when my dad had the stroke that made a nursing home necessary. And he moved into the same nursing home as his brother Bob. And I very vividly remember coming home to Montana that Easter season to spend a few weeks with my dad. And all three of us, my dad, my uncle Bob, and myself, we all ate our meals at the same table in the nursing home during that week I was home, those 2 weeks I was home. And the staff started referring to us as the Winkowitsch table. And I truly treasure those weeks spent with them in the nursing home. My uncle's mental faculties had started to deteriorate, right? But my dad was sharp as a tack right up until the end. And I watched my dad day after day after day just take care of his little brother Bob in that nursing home. My dad was calling for a nurse whenever my Uncle Bob needed help. My dad was helping Uncle Bob eat whenever he was struggling. My dad continued to share stories of when they were little kids growing up in South Dakota. And it took 89 years, but my dad truly forgave his brother. And up until they both entered their eternal reward later that year, they could both pray together with their whole hearts before every single meal at the Winkowitsch table. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Forgiveness is the heart of our faith, the absolute heart, and it produces friendship with family and others and God that opens the gate to heaven. So now I want to transition a little bit to talk about friendship and the fruit of forgiveness, authentic friendship. This is the back of your handout on the bottom. I'm going to take this in two parts. First, we'll talk about natural friendship, friends with other people. And then we'll talk about supernatural friendship, our friendship with God. Because grace builds on nature, right? Grace always builds on nature. So we can look around at the natural world and we can see how we can have a strong foundation to approach God. So natural friendship, the ideal is given to us by Jesus in John chapter 15, verse 13. Jesus said, "Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down your life for your friends." We were all made for love. We were all made for friendship. And we must understand and experience both natural love and natural friendship so that we can have a natural foundation upon which supernatural friendship is built, right? It's offered us in the Holy Eucharist. In his first encyclical, Pope St. John Paul the Great, as I like referring to him as, because I think he was amazing, he said, "Man cannot live without love. He remains a being that is incomprehensible for himself. His life is senseless if love is not revealed to him, if he does not encounter love, if he does not experience it and make it his own, if he does not participate intimately in it. Without love, we are lost. And in such a void, the first experience that draws us towards intimacy is a revelation of love. That revelation is then encountered, which gives us our first opportunity to experience love. And we must nevertheless actively receive that love and make it our own. And then once we have our own ability to love, then we're able to love in return and thus participate in loving intimacy. That's why we read, right? We love because God first loved us. It's the love of our mothers holding us in her arms that opens our capacity to begin to love in the natural. Same thing in the supernatural. God's love must be experienced in order to be able to return that love. And the process of growth in love, from first revelation to intimately participating, that's the work of an entire lifetime. The ultimate vocation of every single human being. Doesn't matter if you're single, religious, or married, in holy orders, your vocation is to love. It's that simple. Every single human being, your vocation is to love, and to love intimately. St. Catherine of Siena, that great Dominican mystic, expressed this same truth. I love it. She's one of my heroes. In her dialogue with God, albeit she expresses it with a gardener's touch. This is what she says. "All of you are trees of love. You cannot live without love because I made you for love." St. Catherine wisely recognizes that like trees, we grow in love. We grow in love with other people and with God. So, let's begin by looking at how we naturally grow in love and intimacy with other people in natural friendship. And then we'll see how supernatural friendship with God builds upon that. So, let's look at our natural friendships. Just think about your own life, the best friends you've had, how you found them, who they are, right? Now, there's three basic ways that we find friends in our lives. Just think about the friends you have. Think about how you first met them, right? We can find our friends through things that we have fun doing, right? You have the same interests in sports or games or interests or hobbies. You can find friends that way. You can also find friends through people who are helpful, teachers, mentors. You may meet somebody just going to get your car fixed at a mechanic and you just hit it off, right? Through useful things. Some of my teachers are some of my best friends, right? That's another way you can find friends. You can also find friends by recognizing virtue in someone. Seeing someone and be like, that is an amazing person. I want to be like them. I want to learn from them. I want to be friends with them. Right? So heroes, role models, spiritual directors, these type of friends are important. So think about who your best friend is, right? How did you meet them? My best friend when I was in 4th grade, 5th grade, I met him just because we had the same interests. We liked football, we liked video games, and we just hit it off. And man, he was the best friend I ever had. It was amazing. It's one of these friendships where each of us thought the other person was the most amazing person in the world, right? he would look at me, he's like, oh, John, you're so big and strong, you could be the next Arnold Schwarzenegger if you would go into bodybuilding. You just have the skeletal structure and all these things. And he was like 5'6", but he was this natural gymnast. He could be doing backflips and back handsprings and front flips. I'm like, man, you could be a ninja. You're so amazing. And we would be on the football team together, and I would be blocking for him, and he was this amazing running back. And I mean, he would talk about me like I was Arnold Schwarzenegger, and yet every time we arm wrestled, he would beat me, this little 5'6" kid. And he was the only person I couldn't beat arm wrestling. I'm like, dude, you're so much stronger than I am. Yeah, but he's like, but you are so big. Like, I don't know. It was this amazing friendship, right? We each thought the other was the best in the world. And when we were in 8th grade, the high school football coach watched our team play, and he's like, I'm going to retire when those guys are seniors because I want to retire with a state championship. It's true. We were amazing. Other teams wouldn't even get first downs against us. Now, what types of friends do we need? This is something we often forget about. We need 3 types of friends. We need friends who are younger than us, siblings, godchildren, students, people who look up to us, because that helps us grow, right? It helps us through acts of charity, passing on what we've learned. We also need friends who are the same age as us, who are growing, learning about life at the same time, peers, classmates, teammates. We have those in abundance these days. But we also need friends who are older than us. Parents, teachers, spiritual directors, mentors, people you look up to. Make sure your friendships cross the generational boundaries. It's so important. Like when I was younger, this was easy because you had to have the landline phone and you had to call your friend and you had to talk to their parents and be like, hey, can I talk to... It just naturally had this, the way, but now everybody has direct connection to the people with your cell phone. So it takes additional effort on your part to make sure you have direct connection to cross-generational friendships. Super important. So do you have siblings? Do you have hero? Make sure you develop these type of friendships. Now, how do you grow in your friendships with your peers, your natural friends, right? Well, 3 practical ways of growing in friendship and intimacy with other people in your life. 3 activities that are vital to living your vocation well and loving your neighbor, as Jesus taught us, right? First, communicating. And communicating fully. This leads to a union of intellect, a union of emotions, right? You must spend time communicating. And in today's world, we have so many ways to communicate. Social media, texting, email, right? But the unfortunate thing is they leave us feeling empty inside because it's just communicating information and not communicating emotions. 90% of what we communicate when we're together in life is not just data, right? We're failing to communicate on all the nonverbal levels. That's why so much communication is emotionally and spiritually empty. To grow in intimacy in our relationships with our loved ones, no matter if you're celibate or married, whatever, it doesn't matter. You need to communicate fully and make choices that give you the opportunity to do so, right? Invite friends over for a dinner party, start a book club, discuss ideas, writing club, whatever. Discuss your stories with each other. You need to make an effort to always eat around the table with other people. Set time aside to discuss your day with other people, lunch break, drink after work. I don't know. All these suggestions provide opportunities to communicate naturally and fully so that you can develop fulfilling friendships. Communicating leads to intimacy of ideas and feelings, right? But we also need to do things with our friends. Do things, projects, sports, games. And this leads to an intimacy of will, right? So not just ideas or feelings where you just talk to each other and communicate fully. You also have to do things where you're not really, it's like instead of looking at each other, you're looking at some project. You do things with other people. And working side by side with someone on a common project, tasks that draw you in a way together that simply communicating doesn't, there's a bond of trust that develops. When you work with someone on the same task, play with each other as teammates in a sports league or board games. Married couples, when they first get married, they're sharing their ideas and their feelings, right? But then you have kids, and then you have this common project, and your wills become united, and that's where the trust develops. It's wild how children can create more trust in a relationship. Communicating leads to an intimacy of ideas and feelings. Doing things leads to an intimacy of will. Now, the third thing, and I'm just reflecting on my own experience with David, right? With my friend. You just got to spend time with your friend. Take a walk, read together, watch a movie. And this leads to just a union of existence. Spend time just being with another. There's one wise priest I know who would commonly give the same advice to couples who are having difficulty in their marriage. Just take a daily walk together. Sure, conversation might arise naturally, but even if no words are said, the simple act of just being together on a walk draws people closer. If you can sit comfortably in silence with another person, it's a sure sign of intimacy in the relationship. Communicating leads to an intimacy of ideas and feelings, right? Doing leads to an intimacy of wills. Just being with a friend leads to an intimacy of existence. My friend. 8th grade was amazing. Then high school came, sophomore year, falling into drugs and alcohol, dropping out, classmates. My 8th grade football team, there were only 10 of us seniors left on the team. We ended up going 4-4. And all my other friends actually blamed me about my best friend because everybody else saw what such good friends we were. And I never said, you don't got to do this, man. I'm not doing it. You can stand up together. I was, I don't know, cowardly or what. I don't know what it was. But they're like, man, you guys were the best friends ever. If you just would have stood up for him. Oh, man, I blame myself for a long time for that. One of the most beautiful things about our Catholic faith, though, is that grace builds on nature. I mentioned that before, right? We strive for intimacy in our natural friendships. And we're growing in natural virtue and our capacity to receive grace necessary to grow in intimacy with our Lord Jesus Christ. We're called to love God and our neighbor. We can't focus entirely on our relationship with God while ignoring our neighbor and expect to grow closer to Christ. We grow in intimacy with our friends and our family and our loved ones in our daily lives. We're also building a natural foundation upon which the grace of supernatural charity can be built. But what exactly is charity? Again, the ideal is given to us now by St. Thomas Aquinas in his Summa Theologiae. Now this, oh man, I spent a lot of time studying St. Thomas Aquinas. And this is maybe my favorite little trivia fact that not many people hear, but I love it. So St. Thomas Aquinas, greatest theologian in the history of the church, universal doctor of the church. He's amazing, right? He wrote this work called the Summa Theologiae. Summarizes all of theology in the first 1,300 years of the church, pretty much. And all the ancient Greek philosophers and all the Old Testament. He summarizes the whole thing in this great masterwork of theology, right? And the way it's structured is he just splits it up into questions. And each question has an article, right? And the questions, he ended up writing 512 of the questions during his lifetime. And then God revealed himself. And he said, everything I've written seemed a straw. He never finished. He just stopped after his 512th question. Boom, done. And if you look at what he actually wrote, and you go to the absolute heart of it, question 256, the exact midpoint, the heart of the greatest work of theology ever written, is the question, what is charity? And he says, friendship with God. It's the heart of all theology. It's amazing. Intimacy with the Lord is charity. The very heart of the greatest work of theology ever written is the question, what is charity? And at the exact midpoint, the angelic doctor's most famous theological work, friendship with God. Now, grace builds on nature. Just think about everything I just said about your natural friendships by analogy with God. Absolutely. Like how we find natural friends, right? Well, things that are fun or helpful or virtuous, right? Same way we can find God, by seeking the truth with all your mind. That's what led me to be baptized when I was 21. Never even met a Catholic, and I just wanted to find the truth, and I wanted to love God, and I ended up Catholic before I'd even met a Catholic, because it's so beautiful. If you seek the truth, you will find the Catholic faith. But you can also find the Catholic faith through the good. If you were baptized as a baby, infused with grace at such a young age, being raised in the faith, you don't even know what's going on, and God's grace is just seeping into your soul. That goodness creates habits of faith that are so beautiful. And beauty is the third way you can find the faith, right? Seeing the sanctity of the saints. And I want to do a little detour right here about the three truths we find when we're seeking God. The first, the greatest, the height, the most important dogma of the entire faith is the Trinity. God is a friendship of persons, a relations of persons, perfectly loving persons. Relations between persons is the essence of our faith, the absolute heart of what we believe. And that's true. You look around at every single person in the world, doesn't matter what they believe, where they come from, when they're lying on their deathbed, what are they thinking about? They're thinking about the relations between the persons in their lives, because we're created in the image of the Trinity, and that is the truth at the heart of our faith. And what do we find also? The second most important belief in our faith, the incarnation. This relation between persons in love is so loving. He had to come down and offer in friendship his hand, his physical hand on the cross to welcome us up. The third thing we find, the communion of saints. It's so beautiful. Eternal friendship with each other. That great heavenly wedding feast is what we were created for. And now, let's go back. What type of friendships did we need in our natural friendships, right? You need people who are younger, same age and older. Same thing in the supernatural. You need friends, the church penitent, right? People in purgatory that we help with our prayers, like people who are younger than us, who we can help up with our prayers to that great heavenly wedding feast. Our heroes and parents and people we love who've gone before us, we can still be with and help and pray. We also need people who are the same age as us in the church militant. Everybody sitting in this room together right now. People on earth fighting against evil, fighting for justice, learning to love, learning to forgive, growing in sanctity and holiness. You also need people who are older than you. The church triumphant, people in heaven helping us with their prayers, right? When I was 19, this is before I was Catholic, I decided to put God to the test. I don't advise you to do this, but I wasn't Catholic yet, so I'm like, wow, I'm just going to put God to the test. Because I was 19 and I'm seeking the truth, right? And I read in the gospel, Matthew 6, verse 6. When you pray, go to your inner room, close the door, and pray to your Father in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will repay you. I'm like, okay, I'll test this out. Because I was like, I don't know if I believe any of this yet. Maybe prayer is just this psychological cascade through a population of people, and you let people know what you're praying for, and it prays, and it goes, and then somebody will feel charity. Like, but, wow, this verse? If I pray in secret and never tell anybody what I'm praying for? Really? Really? Will it really make something happen? That's what I did. And what I wanted more than anything was for my friend who'd fallen away into these things and dropped out of high school. And I'm like, man, that was the best friendship I ever had. What I want more than anything is to be with my friend at that great heavenly wedding feast somehow. Now, grace builds on nature. We can identify three ways of growing in divine intimacy with our Lord, the same way we grow in intimacy with our natural friends, right? How do we grow with our friends? Remember? Communicating, doing things, just hanging out, just being together. It works the same with God, right? If you want to grow in divine intimacy, you got to communicate. You got to pray. You must pray. You got to make a habit of it. in good times, in bad times. That's going to create the union of intellect with you and God, a union of emotions between you and Jesus. Just as we need to spend time communicating with other people fully, you must spend time praying with the Lord to grow in intimacy with Him. And just like your natural friends, you got to do things with them to grow in intimacy of will. So you got to do things with God. That's acts of charity. When you do loving actions, your will is being conformed to the will of God. Love of neighbor, doing things with God. That is one of the deepest types of prayer, union of will. I love St. Teresa of Avila in her letters. And one of the sisters is complaining about, I got to scrub pots in the kitchen all day. How am I supposed to ever pray? And St. Teresa's like, no, you just need to do it with love for your sisters. And then your will be united with God as you scrub those pots out of love for your sisters. And that becomes a prayer. Union of wills is an incredibly powerful prayer. And it's so important to remember that, especially when you are extraordinarily busy in your life. You can make every moment a prayer by uniting your will to God's. Just as we spend time doing things with other people, so we should also spend time doing things with God by striving to conform your will to His. And last, just as we grow closer to our friends by just hanging out, watching a movie, doing a Netflix binge, whatever, just being in the same room together with them, there's a union of existence that comes about. You're sharing your lives, you're living together. That creates intimacy. Same with God, same with Jesus. Sitting in adoration. Jesus there in the monstrance, just existing with Him. Just as simply spending time being with other people, so we should spend time being with our Lord Jesus in adoration. Father Norris Clark, he was a Jesuit that taught at Fordham for many, many years, spent his life studying St. Thomas Aquinas. He relates an adorable story in his article, The Creative Imagination. He asked a group of grade school children, tiny little kids, right? Explain to me what you guys do when you pray. And he said, one girl answered, when I pray, I make like a flower before God. Wow. That might not work for guys, but it's a beautiful answer from a little girl, right? Such a beautiful way of expressing the importance of just spending time being in the presence of God, in adoration. And the intimacy born of adoration, it's not a knowledge of thoughts or feelings. It's not a union of wills, but it's an intimacy that reaches to the very essence of ourselves, our very being. So spend time in the Eucharistic chapel. Spend time in adoration. Unite your very being with God by simply spending time there. I was praying in my room for a long time. 19, I decided to make that test of God. Praying 19 till I was 20. 21, I found Thomas Aquinas College on the internet. I'm like, I'm going to go there. Secretly praying for my friend. Go to Thomas Aquinas College in Southern California. I was baptized freshman year, finally become Catholic, and I'm still praying for my friend Dave, sophomore, junior, senior year. Fell in love with philosophy, decided to apply to graduate school. Fly out to the East Coast, Catholic University, studying philosophy. Still praying for my friend Dave, first year. Found a part-time job, leading confirmation retreats on the weekend. Second year grad school, I go home to visit my family for Christmas. Go to the Catholic Church in my hometown in Cutbank, Montana, which has a grand total Sunday Mass attendance of about 40 people. Sit down, in walks my friend. Sits down next to me. I'm like, what are you doing here? You're not Catholic. And he's like, I don't know. I just like going to church now. It gives me peace. I think I'm going to be baptized at Easter. Will you be my sponsor? Oh my. Like 7 years of praying in secret. I don't tell you to put God to the test, but God is forgiving and God is loving, and He will work with us where we're at. So do not ever give up on your friends. Keep praying always. Grow in friendship with people and with God, and you must forgive to make those relationships healthy and intimate and authentic. Let us pray. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. God, you are so good. You are so patient with us. Continue to send your Holy Spirit into our hearts. Help us grow in love by experiencing your love and imitating it. Open our hearts to be a conduit of your grace to everyone around us. Help that sanctifying grace pour through our souls, pour through that seal on our souls that you've put there at baptism and confirmation. And let that light shine on everyone around us so that we can live forever with you in heaven for all eternity in that great heavenly wedding feast of eternal friendship. We pray in your name, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.
All right. Thank you so much, Father. So we do have a couple of questions for the Q&A. And just a reminder to everyone, if you would like to submit a question, there should be a QR code on the front of the handout. It takes you to our link tree, and you can just submit a question that way. So we'll go through a couple for you. So the first one, how do I approach someone who I have hurt deeply, not knowing if it would hurt them more by reaching out?
How do I approach someone that you have hurt deeply?
Yes.
Okay, I will say a couple things. First, spend time in prayer and self-reflection to make sure that you are not doing this selfishly because of the pain in your heart that you're unwilling to bear. You could potentially be doing it selfishly, so you have to be honest and self-reflective about that. If you spend time doing that and you realize that they are really suffering and your apology is completely selfless and you can see it as an act of charity and mercy that may help them forgive, then it would be worth doing. But it has to be a completely selfless act. It must be an act of charity. It must be an act of mercy. So when you do it, make sure that you almost forget yourself and you focus entirely on the other and let charity be your mode of speaking. Yeah? Okay.
Perfect. Next question. For some people, it is easy to forgive other people, but not to forgive ourselves for something.
Yeah.
How do we apply those same steps when we have difficulty forgiving ourselves?
This is a great question. And I thought about addressing this immediately in the talk because it is a very common question people have. And I think this is the answer. The answer is asking and begging God for humility. I think humility is the key virtue that helps us forgive ourselves. And humility, I mean, that sounds like great advice. Humility, but humility is like the most complicated virtue of all the virtues. Like Aristotle, the greatest Greek philosopher, the greatest moral philosopher who has ever lived, didn't even treat humility in his great work in Nicomachean Ethics because he just didn't understand it. Humility, here's why humility is so difficult to understand. It's kind of like being at both extremes at the same time. And it influences both our intellect and our will. So you have this like quadrant of virtues and modes of your life that humility influences, and you got to work on all of them in order to forgive yourself. So humility in the intellect is the virtue of honesty, sincerity, truth, right? Humility in the will is being satisfied with your lot in life and being okay with where you're at, right? Both of those are important. You may have different issues with why you're struggling to forgive yourself, but it might be in one of those two areas. And on the opposite ends of the spectrum, humility, when you think about intellect and you look at yourself, what are you in relation to God? Well, if you look at it objectively, we're pretty much almost nothing. We're tiny little things in existence, right? Like we are nothing. You read the litany of humility, for instance, or God in St. Catherine of Siena's dialogue that says, I am he who is and you are she who is not, right? There's this sense where the saints would even talk about themselves as being the greatest of all sinners, and I am the cause of all sin in the church. And you're like, what are you talking about? You're a saint that works miracles all the time. How can you be the cause of all sin? And the only way that works, and seeing yourself that way, is if at the exact same time you realize that you are the most precious, the most beloved person in existence, and that Jesus would have came down and died on the cross just for you, even if you were the only person that accepted his offer of love and eternal friendship. You have to realize you are the most precious, beloved person in the world, while also being almost infinitesimal as to be nothing. And it seems so paradoxical, right? But when you're struggling to forgive yourself, you got to think about, okay, where am I struggling with humility? Am I struggling to see myself as the most beloved person who has ever walked the face of the earth because God came and died and laid his life down on the cross just for me? Maybe. If you see yourself like that, or whatever I did, he fixed it. He fixed it on the cross. He redeemed us, right? But maybe your struggle is recognizing that I am nothing, and I am the cause of all sin in the world, like the saints say in some weird way that's hard to understand. But you have to be at both extremes at the same time in a weird way, both intellect and will, and nothing and everything. Humility is a complicated virtue. So my little answer of, how do I forgive myself? Be more humble. It's tough, but I really do think humility is the virtue that you should strive to grow in order to forgive yourself.
Good response. Thank you. Similar to that is another question. What do we do for someone who repeatedly hurts us after we have forgiven them?
Oh, this takes prudence, because we are called to always forgive, but not always reconcile. So sometimes the prudent action is cutting off the relationship. And that's tough. That can be really, really tough. But remember, forgiveness does not mean renouncing efforts to obtain restitution or legal justice. So if someone is repeatedly hurting you, seeking true justice can help heal their soul, right? So Plato's ancient Greek philosopher, in his dialogues, there's a famous one where he talks about, I would rather be punished rather than get away and not be punished for something. Because by being punished, justice is restored, I grow in virtue in my soul. If I get away with doing something wrong, then it doesn't. So if someone's repeatedly hurting you, you have to take prudence, discern, decide, and do something that will achieve justice. And if that means cutting off the relationship, that's fine. That's fine. If that's the right thing to do, it's okay. We're not called to have, like, reconcile with everybody who hurts us. There's just people in my life who I continue to pray for and hope to see in that heavenly wedding feast someday. But yeah, I just couldn't be friends with them anymore during this lifetime because our time and space is limited. Yeah, that's what I would say. If they're repeatedly hurting you, maybe you should cut off the friendship, the relationship.
And then speaking of friendship, do you think finding friends online is natural that can lead to virtuous friendships? How do you feel about meeting people online versus in person?
Yeah, we live in a strange, different world that's unlike the history of the universe. I think it's okay. The way the world is today, meeting people online is just a natural part of our life. It's so wild. When I showed up at Catholic University of America to start grad school, we got an email first week. Oh, we're trying some new thing so the new class can meet each other. It's called the Facebook. You can only sign up for it if you have a cua.edu account, And you'll be able to meet other new people who are arriving on campus. So I signed up and I'm like, okay, I'm interested in hacky sack and I'm interested in football. And I met some people. So you can meet people online, but you have to realize that it's super, super important to continually strive for full communication by getting together in person somehow. It's just, you have to do that. If all your friendships are only online, you're going to end up feeling lonely and empty because you're not getting emotional communication. Some of it is conveyed through tone of voice. Video conferencing, you can see them a little bit, but no, you got to find a way to get together in person in order to have healthy, emotionally fulfilling, natural friendships.
Okay, perfect. And speaking of friendships, and you can say however much or little you want, but people are asking any update on your friend Dave.
Oh, no, he's amazing. I see him every time I go back to Montana. And yeah, God is so good. I can't believe how amazing God is. Like, I was ordained June 5th, 2021. And one of the first things you do when you're ordained a priest is you go do masses of Thanksgiving at all the places that were important to you. So of course I got to go back to my hometown and do a mass of Thanksgiving for the 40 Sunday Mass attendees in my hometown, right? And I planned that so far in advance. I got ordained June 5th, and I'm like, okay, I'll go to Montana in August. And right like 2 days before I was scheduled to get on the plane and be there for my home visit, my friend calls me and his dad had just died. And so I was perfectly there, perfectly timed to do mass for my best friend's dad and his funeral. God knows what he's doing. We have to trust him. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering, but God's grace redeems us all, and we just trust in that. You just have to trust in that. Oh, it's good. Oh, thank you all. I went a little bit over, but God bless you.